These video cameras, they're great, except when they stop working. And you know what you want to do?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Digital Doc Interviews. I am Digital Doc, and with me is Dr. Kent Norman, who is a cognitive psychologist and, reading right off of Wikipedia, an expert in computer rage. So we have a lot of interesting conversations to have with Kent today. A little backstory, Kent was also a professor at the University of Maryland, where I attend college, and taught a very interesting class called Psychology of Video Games, which I am very bitter about, because even though I was a psychology major and the class was locked to psychology students, I could never get a spot. So I tracked down Kent and I said, in 1 hour, you're going to give me a crash course into what I missed. So Kent, thank you so much for coming to chat with me today. How's it going?
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. And excited that you're into this adventure of video games in health and medicine.
Definitely, definitely. And like I said, your Wikipedia bio says you're an expert in computer rage. So either we're looking at someone who has dedicated his career to understanding and preparing for the inevitable rise of the machines, or computer rage means something a little bit different, maybe more grounded in psychology, is what I'm guessing.
Yes, well, it all started around, believe it or not, 2004, when there were these reports of Germans that were getting so frustrated with their computers that they were smashing them, throwing them out of windows, stuff like that. So this hit the news, and it was kind of resonated with me, because the problem is the more you deal with computers, the more frustration you get. And then you want to take that rage out on something, and you don't want to do it on your peers sitting next to you.
Hopefully not. And
you definitely don't want to do it, with an actual working computer. So what I did in a series of videos, you can also go to my channel on YouTube, and look at me destroying computers. You always take that machine that was so frustrating, wait till it's obsolete, put it aside, and then at that moment of rage, take it outside and do whatever you want to with it.
Really? So you're one of those guys that has those videos of you destroying technology?
Yes.
Wow.
Chopping the keyboard in half with an axe.
Oh my God.
Smashing computer screens underwater so that I won't get hurt.
So is that therapeutic for you?
It really was.
Amazing.
Actually, when I was a little kid, I would get frustrated. My mom said, well, just go in the garage and break something. and I found these old vacuum tubes, and I would just throw them on the floor.
Yeah.
Watch them pop. And it releases the tension.
Right.
And you feel a lot better.
Right. Well, now hold on. I remember as a psych major learning, I think it was in Dr. Curtis's class, Interpersonal Relationships, which was actually one of my favorite classes I took at Maryland. And I think we learned about the idea of like screaming into a pillow as like catharsis.
Right. Yeah.
And how actually, I think Dr. Curtis said that didn't actually help you kind of relief, and that actually brought up more stress. So do you have a disagreement there?
Yes, actually, I think I wouldn't scream into the pillow. I would throw the pillow.
Uh-huh.
Get into a good pillow fight. Because you also have to be active, in this, and get yourself, perspiring, and, you might even get yourself hurt, which I have done that. But anyway, so I started getting into this, and actually did a report with my brother, who's a social worker, about techno stress and the whole buildup that we're all feeling, particularly now, with the stay-at-home orders and, working at home. There's much more going on with this. And sometimes we just need to vent. So I came up with some principles of, how to vent properly, so that you're not hurting other people, damaging, real equipment, because there were just like too many reports in the media about you know, there was this one restaurant owner that had a laptop, and he was, you know, like so mad at it being so slow pulling up his spreadsheet that he would thump on the laptop, and he went through hard drives one after another.
Wow.
Because it just was
Yeah.
not a good idea.
Oh, I mean, we've all lived through it when something's not working, and either depends who you are. The first thing you try, the last thing you try is just to smack your computer.
That's right.
So I think that's interesting.
You know, take a deep breath, go out of the room, and then, you know, come back when you're calm. Just, you know, put that frustration aside, and then bring it back when you've got something that you can actually break.
Right. No, but it's a good point. It just made me think, you know, a lot of the audience members, the viewers of this channel are medical professionals and doctors who work in the hospital. And I think, I mean, to be honest, as someone who loves technology, one of the things that drew me away from working in the hospital was the technology and how frustrating it can be to use technology in the healthcare setting. And this is not a novel concept at all. Anyone who works in the hospital knows about this. So that would be really interesting. Maybe we would see burnout sharply decline if there was a annual event where you got to take the old tech, bring it out into the parking lot, and just have at it, all the doctors and nurses.
Yeah, I know one of the major computer companies would do that. You know, they'd have, like, you know, meetings, and then they'd have a break, a literal breakout where they would go out into the parking lot and smash computers. And so I guess, you know, like with surgeons, I can imagine them, you know, dragging those Da Vinci machines and X-ray technologists taking the X-ray machines out and just
to see, make ssure that's safe for radiation. We'll have to think about that one.
Put on your lid.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's awesome. That I had to ask. Computer rage. That's a great term. So, Kent, how did, you know, your interest in computers and technology and computer rage and psychology, how did that all channel into eventually teaching a course and dedicating a part of your career to the psychology of video games?
Yeah, well, one part of it had to do with the development of a scale on computer user satisfaction, and are people satisfied, you know, with the interface, the screen, all that kind of stuff. And we did that for years and years and years, and realized that, you know, if you actually plot like computer rage over time, it's not going down. It's pretty much staying, you know, goes up and down a little bit, but, you know, and the major cause of frustration is actually the computer crashing, losing files, that kind of stuff. And yet the computer companies they're not really looking at solving that problem completely. You know, if it comes to some safety system, they make sure that it's a fail-proof system, but for users, not so much. And I was thinking, well, what areas are there where we have the most frustrated users that are still, you know, banging away on their keyboards and more engaged than anybody else? And it's the video game. It's people playing video games. And they stick to it. They grind through the most boring situations. They will work for hours. In fact, they will get addicted to it. And so there's something about gaming that was just, you know, captivating. And then there's the whole, you know, side of, you know, the fact that computer video games have been so encompassing in people's lives. Just the number of hours that they play video games versus maybe studying for school or spending time in class. So it seemed to me, you know, we've got psychology courses on all different sorts of topics. So I thought, you know, really a large impact of our behavior and thought is in video games, and we really need to have a course on that.
Wow.
So the first thing I did was look for a textbook. And lo and behold, a little search, I found a book by two famous cognitive psychologists, Loftus and Loftus, called The Mind at Play, The Psychology of Video Games. Perfect. perfect. So then I looked down, and it was published in 1983, the height of the video game arcade.
Right. Right. Let's see, what game was popular in 1983? Are we looking at like Pac-Man, Space
Yeah.
Invaders? Yeah.
Space Invaders, yep. And so I got a copy of the book, read it, and it was actually really brilliant because they touched on a lot of the issues that are still current today. And they had their predictions at the end, that computers would be more and more involved rather than video game arcades.
Right.
So so actually, if you had taken that course, you would have been required to read that textbook from way back in '83.
Uh-huh.
The book actually also refers to the Surgeon General at the time warning that video games are hazardous to
Okay.
youth. And in the media over the time, we have had that, kind of really negative view of video games, that they're injuring kids, they lead to violence, they lead to addiction, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, I'm thinking, wait a second, football, baseball, they're addictive. Kids play them. Basketball, they're out there. And a lot of these kids are getting killed. They're dying, more often from playing football and baseball than, playing video games.
Sure.
So, so I thought about the course, taught it experimentally for one semester. And to me, it was the hardest course ever to teach because of the diversity of the audience. I had some people that were just, not as interested, particularly later on when it was for psychology majors. So it was a hard course because of that. And also because some of these kids would know more about games than I would. All right, because I'm not an avid gamer. I mean, I dabble in games and stuff. I've got 4 kids that were pretty much raised on video games, and I particularly with my 2 sons have encouraged it.
Yeah.
Buying my kid, first Game Boy.
Right. Oh man, what a dad. I gotta have you talk to my father. We were banned to only be able to play Game Boys in car rides, like on long road trips, and we weren't able to have video game consoles in the house for a very long time until me being the youngest child and breaking all the rules because no one cared at that point.
Yeah, you even had the little light adapter on it so you could play it under the covers in bed.
Yeah, of course.
So one of the requirements also of the course was that they had to do a video game journal. And in this journal, they had to play at least 2 hours of video games a week. Okay. Now, for some students, that was like, I don't play video games. What do I do? So some of them played, web-based games, and other, games on their phones, all that kind of stuff. And then others, 2 hours? Are you kidding? I had one student that maxed out at 60 hours on 1 week.
1 week. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope that was a part-time student and was just taking your course very seriously. No,
and she was an A+ student. She was Korean. She had not hacked, but gotten an account for a beta Korean game, and was spending all night playing on this game.
Yeah.
But for a lot of them, it would range, from the minimum of 2 hours up to 4 to 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
They also had a lot of online homework assignments, as well as the game journal to pick a target game to analyze, to write about that game. Let's see, what else?
I'm curious, as not to jump ahead, I guess a little bit, but as you progressed through the years and were teaching this course, in the later years, did you find that the students and the games that they chose to focus on were different at all? Because as the video game medium grew, there are so many more games to choose from that really could be excellent, studies of mental health or serious
Right.
topics, a lot more than just playing, not that there isn't value to play a Call of Duty or a Halo, but I would say a lot more focused value.
Yes. Probably one of the things that you notice, over that time was going more to mobile gaming.
Mm-hmm.
That just became much more popular, much more available. So, I myself started playing Subway Surfer while standing in line at a grocery store.
Right, right,
Just that you're bored for a second, and so you pull out your smartphone.
right.
Also, the rise of more online gaming with MOBAs, massively online battle arenas, as well as much more casual gaming. My wife is not a gamer, and I tell her, yes, you are. You play Words with Friends
Right.
on your iPad. It's a video.
And it's so interesting because, I mean, you just named so many different types of games, and they all can have a value. I mean, Words with Friends was one of the first like social mobile games that stands out to me. Really, I mean, I think that was my freshman year. It was popular, 2012. And sitting around the cafeteria or like being in class, everyone was on Words of Friends. And
Yeah.
the great thing about it was how it was asynchronous play, and that you didn't need to both be there at once, but it sent a message that your turn was ready. So what an interesting way to connect. So I have here the syllabus for your course, okay? And again, I'm very bitter that I was not in this course.
I feel
But
it.
right, I'm gonna start smashing stuff. I hope we make it through this call. I'm just gonna read. There's a good amount of topics here, but I guess it's broken into each class. So I'll start going through. So day one, introduction to the course. Syllabus day. It's okay if you miss it. Whatever. People are still switching courses. Day two, introduction to video games. The history of video games. More history. Gameplay and discussion. Types, genres, factors, etc. Gameplay and discussions, development of video games, theory and psychology of games, attraction of video games, video game addiction, team presentations, gameplays, discussions, human factors of controllers and displays, virtual reality systems, immersion and engagement, midterm exam, cognitive aspects, let's see, gender issues, social aspects of gaming, violence and moral choices, serious games, universal access, the future of games, final exam. So, I mean, each day there's so many interesting topics. So eventually, is this an up-to-date syllabus of when you left UMD?
Yeah, that is correct.
Really grew. It really grew. So what would you say was your most interesting takeaway? What surprised you from teaching the course?
Probably the thing that I learned, most importantly, was the need for analysis, self-examination. Basically, my theme that I took away was that the unexamined game is not worth playing. If you're just playing a game, okay, you start the game, you end the game, and your memory of that game is zero. So it's wasted time. But if you analyze, why am I playing the game? What am I doing? Then you fill those moments with thoughts. The one thing we know, this is kind of goes way back to an interesting principle in psychology. When we think about the passage of time and you're really bored, like you're standing in line for a couple of hours and nothing is happening, during that time, you're going like, oh, time is going so slow. At the end of that time, the next day when you remember it, it seemed like it wasn't very short because you don't have anything to remember from that time.
Right.
Whereas if you're really busy doing something, mentally processing all that information, it seems like, oh man, time is going so fast. I'm like running to keep up with the events of this time. And at the end of that, you remember that it was really slow. There was so many things that were in it. So in video game playing, the one thing that I really take away is how much we can gain out of it. I mean, I thought, starting the course, I wanted to focus on, like the positive aspects of games while dealing with, the negative, destructive aspects as well. But it's such a, complex thing. And what I take away and that I want gamers to take away is that what happens in the game doesn't stay in the game, it comes out into our real world. We know that we bring our personalities into the game. If you make an avatar, you typically, make it look like yourself or what you might like to be. And then when you're playing in the game, there's, some research that's sort of moral choices that we would make in real life, we also make in the game. I'm thinking, hey, I can get away with running over this little old lady in Carmageddon. But, you feel bad if you do.
Right.
I tried that in the game Red Dead Redemption.
Sure.
And you're in this open game where you're riding this horse and, just going all over the place doing stuff, either helping people or not helping people. And there's this dog. And I thought, I love dogs, but what would it be like to shoot a dog? So I shot the dog.
Yeah.
And I'm riding along a little bit further, and there's a wanted poster for somebody who shot the dog.
Wow. Wow.
And said, uh-oh, the game got me.
And I mean, how did you feel after you shot the dog?
I felt terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess the next question is, where's the value in that, in being able to explore some bad things in games at, still at a distance because you're not actually doing it? How does that help you or hurt you?
Well, I guess, what I'd like to think is that in games we can learn, positive aspects. I mean, our lab went through a series of studies, showing the kinds of positive things that people learn through games. Obviously eye-hand coordination, problem solving, actually resource management is really an interesting one.
Interesting.
Going into stores, buying stuff, selling stuff.
Right. There's always the gamers that hold on to that one, rare item for the whole game, and they'll end up never using it because they were just waiting for that special time that never came.
So, so there's all these positive aspects, and there's also just kind of the things that you learn, skill sets, more complex ways of solving problems, ways of dealing with other people through the game, in dialogue or whatever through the game. And so those sorts of things, we take away. We know that a video game is a simulation. It's just a digital simulation of something, which can be very abstract, like Mario is very abstract. Tetris is like really abstract. And then we have much, much more realistic games. Tomb Raider has been kind of a big thing in our house, as well as Assassin's Creed. And in those games, you have these kind of choices. Should I go along with the game and do the things that the game requires me to do? And so we can sometimes set aside those moral choices and say, well, I'm playing the game because these are the mechanics of the game for me to beat the game. But then when we go back into the real world, so to speak, we leave all those things behind. And some people have, said, well, children have, a hard time separating reality from fiction. And developmental psychologists doing research on that say, No, that's actually not true. Children are probably better at it than
Right.
adults. Um, so anyway, there's, some of these things that we want to leave within the game, some things that we actually want to pull out of the game. Guitar Hero is an interesting phenomenon because what you learn in the game is timing, hitting the keys at the right point. You're not learning to play guitar at all. You're holding this sort of thing that's a guitar, and people can get really good at it. I had some demos in class of some of my students, just getting applause after they went through that.
Real rock stars.
Yeah. The other thing is I acquired a lot of gaming equipment for the class. And so we would roll that into the class and have real life gaming. When I proposed the course, I should go back to that. When I proposed the course, the university committee said, "Are you kidding? That's not a real course. It's,
Right.
And so they didn't approve it. So I went back to my class and said, "Hey, you guys, why don't you just write like a little paragraph on why this is a valid course?" So I printed that out, sent that to them. They said, "Course approved, and here's here's a grant for $20,000 for developing the course and equipment."
So the students like the course.
Right.
Yeah.
And the faculty on the committee, appreciated the psychological, benefit of the course.
Yeah.
I sometimes, I tell my students up front that while I'm teaching this course, I'm also sneaking in a lot of psychology, Psych 101 stuff that they probably forgot.
Right.
And reinforcing the things that they should have learned in basic psychology, reinforcement theory, personality theory, you name it. In fact, the organization of the course, when you read through that outline, is actually based on an introduction to psychology.
Interesting.
The same progression from kind of the background history through research methods, through cognitive psychology, on down to personality, social, and abnormal psychology.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a great way to teach. My first episode was with Dr. Eric Gantwerker from Level X, and they make video games for doctors at Level X. If you haven't watched it, go watch that episode. It's a great episode. To you and all the viewers. And he likes to talk about chocolate covered broccoli, and that you can't teach, you can't just smack a video game on top of anything and say, there, now it's fun to learn, because eventually you'll figure out, no. But if you can be smart how you integrate these topics with, maybe more interesting topics or entertainment, things like that, and you really probably end up teaching in a much more impactful way. So that's awesome. Again, would have loved to take your class.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part is the section on video games for learning, because, I mean, it's devastatingly bad. It's just what you're talking about. Kids immediately view, they're trying to teach me arithmetic, and they're just putting distracting stuff around this to annoy me. And in a lot of cases, educational video games, they threw millions and millions of dollars into developing video games that at the end of the evaluation were just trash. They just didn't work. They were distracting in the class. The teachers couldn't manage it, and they didn't lead to any good educational outcomes.
Right.
So, so the real way to teach through video games is being totally subtle. And it's sort of what one group calls tangential learning, that you learn about things just because you're interested in the game.
Right.
So for example, I'll give you a current example. I got started playing Animal Crossing recently because of a presentation about micro mistakes that people make in games. I wanted to plant the tree here, but I just mistakenly made it over here, and now I've got it. Okay, so in the game, you go in and donate things in the museum, and I forget the name of the owl. Anyway, the owl asks you, would like more information about this fossil? Okay, so you learn about, all of these things of butterflies, various insects, fish, fossils, and the kids are actually coming away with some of this information.
Right.
They even, in a lot of video games, like Assassin's Creed, this amazing amount of information that you can learn in that game.
As a medical student, being able to talk and walk and play with Hippocrates was incredible for me. I mean, I was shocked. That was in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the one that came out. That was the most recent Assassin's Creed. But I mean, it was, I didn't expect it to be such a humbling experience for me to be able to interact with the founder of medicine. That was pretty neat. Well, I wanted to go back to one of your earlier points. Well, talking about trying to take the game, don't just leave it on the TV or the computer, but take your experience with you. If you're not taking a course like Psychology of Video Games, how would you recommend for people who play games to do that? What are some good methods?
Okay. Well, I guess the first thing would start with what attracts me to this particular game at this particular time? Why did I start playing it? Why did I choose this game? And sometimes it's as simple as, well, I like sports and I like basketball, so I'm playing this game, or I like soccer, so I'm playing FIFA. And then, go to, well, what am I learning about soccer through this game? What transfers or what doesn't transfer? Kind of going back to Guitar Hero, one of my son's friends started playing it. His father is a guitar teacher, and he looked at this and he banned Guitar Hero, from it, because you were learning how not to interact with the guitar.
Right.
So it's sort of, the question of, is this going to have a positive transfer or a negative transfer to the real world? And sometimes, in human factors, it's sort of, if I learn to do something pulling to the left, and in the real world, it's actually pulling to the right, that's a really bad game design. I've got to mirror that. I've got to change that. So then you get negative transfer. Zero transfer, fine. Positive transfer is really good. The most fascinating study that I read on positive transfer, has to do with eye-hand coordination. There's a study on students learning laparoscopic surgery, and they found that those that played more than 6 hours of video games a week did significantly faster and more accurate than those that were not gamers at all.
Right.
But they learn, some things, and it would almost, like, since so much of surgery now is actually manipulating things at remote. So
Camera is right.
Yeah. So that is actually like a huge positive transfer of just knowing that something I manipulate here controls something over here. And then making sure that the timing of events, the direction of events is mapped correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting point. Right. I was one of the first procedures that I was ever involved with was they were using the Da Vinci robot. They were taking out the thymus, but it has, I think 3 or 4 arms, like, that have different attachments. And I think he was only using 2, but exactly, the physician, the surgeon was sitting in the corner in a machine, kind of like a forklift looking thing. And the robot was over there, over the patient. And, for all intents and purposes, it's real life, but it's a video game. It's a very similar set of skill sets.
Yeah. So I had to go in for a laparoscopic surgery, and I asked the guy, "Do you play video games?"
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, for me in med school, video games, I used it whenever I could. When I was at Children's Hospital specifically, I would always break down the barriers with the kid patients, talking about Fortnite. And at first they're like, you don't know Fortnite, as you're an old doctor. And the second I was like, yeah, what's your favorite, gun? My favorite's this. And, how quickly was something, they earned, I got some respect out of that. So
Yeah.
It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other stereotype that we need to break. Young kids think they're the only ones who play video games, and the average age of gamers has gone up to like 40.
Right.
So that's another thing you see over time.
Exactly. So Kent, you retired from UMD. I mean, I'm sure it was a good move, but I gotta say it's a big loss for the school. But what are you doing now? Are you mainly just kind of hanging and playing games and spending time with your kids, or are you still doing some psychology work as well?
Yeah. So actually, going back to that textbook in '83, there still hasn't been a textbook. So I'm working on finishing the textbook for the psychology of video games.
That sounds fascinating. I'm excited for that. And I always, before we close, I always like to we talked about a few games. Anything that you're playing now that's interesting?
Yeah, so sometimes I like to go back to old retro games. So I went back to The World Ends With You. Do you know that one?
Ends With You. It sounds so familiar, but I can't place it.
Yeah, I don't have it loaded up, but it was on the Nintendo.
Uh-huh.
It's also ported over to the Apple Store. But
okay.
It's a fascinating game in which you're in Tokyo at Shibuya Crossing, and it's a game within the game. So you're a character with a partner, and you're basically going through this mind thing where you click and you see noise around you, and you have to beat the noise. So there's things you click on this noise, and then these monsters come out and you shoot the monsters. And so there's this fighting scene that you go through eliminating that. And so in each area, you have to eliminate all the noise. And once the noise is eliminated, it unlocks the Reapers so that you can go to the next part of the city. And it's probably like an anti-pandemic game for me.
Uh-huh.
So that was, a fun game to get back into.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I had a number of students back, a while ago. It's like, The World Ends With You. That's my huge game.
Yeah.
Some students even have said, that game got me through a really tough period when I was a kid.
Really?
There's something about some video games that it's not just a distraction or trying to get into another thing, but essentially a kind of counseling, therapeutic event in their lives.
Absolutely.
So same has been true with Final Fantasy. That people have talked about that to me.
Really? Yeah. Today I'm posting an interview with Simon Hill, who's right now he does a wrestling podcast, but he was a video game show host of conferences and presenters, and he wrote an article on safeinourworld.com about Nathan Drake from the Uncharted games and how that saved his life and actually was really helpful for him to play that while he was going through a very difficult chapter of his life. And certainly I have stories like that of my own where life events are just tied to a game. Because I could even remember, not a bad life event, a great life event, but when my daughter was born, I remember holding her and what game I was playing. I was winning and becoming the champion in Apex Legends. And then when we were in our 1-bedroom apartment, and we divided off the living room with a little divider, and her crib was right there. So at like 6 o'clock every night, we would just tiptoe around our apartment. But I had the TV on and tried to rig it so that the blue light wouldn't go into her room. But I was playing, Jedi Fallen Order while she was trying to sleep. So it's just kind of neat how it can be intertwined with our lives and with how we think of memories. Kind of like a good song.
Right. So it's sort of like, the video games, I think people are playing video games a lot more during this time. My son-in-law is an architect, and so he's working at home in what he calls his dungeon downstairs, which is on his gaming computer.
Yeah.
So he has kind of a meetup with his friends playing, one online game or another. I don't know which one they're into right now.
Right.
Same with my son, who lost both of his jobs and is at home. So he's been building up my gaming computer.
Uh-huh.
Actually, a few years ago, I built 2 computers in my life.
Uh-huh.
One was in 1978 or 77,
Uh-huh.
which was like soldering iron.
Right.
And then the last one here, which is this kind of monster gaming computer. Now you buy a box and you plug stuff in.
Right, right. Not as fun. You don't get to wear the welding helmets and all that.
So I put that together a few years. My son looked at it and he said, "Oh, but the graphics card, the processor." So he just pretty much gutted the whole thing and rebuilt it. And
right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I hope you get some good use out of that. Kent, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. I learned a lot. I feel like I got my crash course, so I forgive UMD a little bit more. Still holding on
now for
to
the final exam.
Okay, let's do that offline. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to watch. This is Digital Doc Interviews. This is Digital Doc Games. Please remember to like and subscribe. I'm having a great time so far, and am not showing any signs of slowing down. So stay tuned for more interviews, more content, and more fun. Thanks, everyone, and game on.